Today's webinar, Creating a Digital-Centered Customer Experience, User Experience and Brand, will be presented by Kalev Peekna. Kalev is the Managing Director of Strategy at One North. His team works with clients on user research, brand positioning, content strategy, information architecture, and user experience of professional websites and other interactive properties. Before Kalev gets started, I'm going to pass it over to Ryan Schulz, Director of Brand Planning, for a few words of introduction.
Thanks, Kayla. Since this is a series, I just wanted to take a minute and recap where we are and where we're going. One of the things that we really believe strongly in here at One North is developing a fully integrated approach to every project and to our offerings in general. We only really extend our service offerings when we believe that it's going to lend something of value to other disciplines and in the end will benefit our clients' long-term interests. And so that's kind of the whole point of this three-part webinar series, starting with my talk last month, with Kalev's today, and then with Nate's next month. So in the first part of this webinar, in my initial webinar, we talked about the relationship between character and reputation and the idea that you need to be actively aware about how you're managing your corporate character. And if you do that correctly, you don't really need to worry about your reputation. And in the end, reputation is really at the heart of what brand is all about, the way people feel about you, the stories that people tell about you. And I think that today you're really in for a treat. We're going to hear from Kalev, and he's going to spend some time talking about the real relationship between brand and UX and UI, which there's some great nuance there. Some things are definitely connected to brand and other things aren't. And Kalev's going to talk a bit about that. Ultimately, where this is all headed is a panel-style discussion that's going to be led by Nate, that's going to be attended by Kalev and myself, and we're going to talk about how a properly formed and executed digital experience is the essential foundation for all positive customer experiences and what that looks like from a visual perspective, an actual experience perspective. So with that, I want to hand it over to Kalev, who's going to talk about creating digital-centered customer experiences as it relates to user experience and brand.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. So, as Ryan said, this is the second part in the series, so we'll start off with previously on One North webinars. If any of you attended the last webinar in this series, Ryan actually talked through what brand means a little bit more openly, but also the right sort of approach, and specifically the right sort of approach for digital. So he presented this model, which is a shared model across One North, and really talk through the several different stages about how it's best to start actually at the top with your essence and purpose, and then work through allowing your brand strategy to sort of permeate through all the way down to the bottom. And when he presented this, one of the words of warning that he gave was actually to really beware of the tactical level. His key takeaways from his talk, you'll remember from the end, were to consider the entire framework, to start at the top, to really create something your stakeholders can actually care about, find your big idea, but to beware of tactics that lack a strategy. Now, I admit this was a little bit hard for me because my entire life is pretty much spent at that red warning level. So after I got over the fact that my colleague trashed my reason for existence, just kidding, we actually gave a lot of thought. And actually, the key of this webinar is to actually flip that joke on its head and to talk about why tactics and strategy, although they're often opposed, are not really two separate things heading in separate directions. We're actually going to talk about how to align your tactics to that strategy, specifically starting with the brand. So today on One North webinars, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to start with the question, does brand and UX UI really go together? And if you're coming at it from different perspectives, especially for people who sit in these two different disciplines, there are actually reasons why you think they don't overlap or that they can't oppose to each other. Brand, on the one hand, tends to be really focused on identity and impressions, tends to be conceptually driven. It's really concerned with differentiation, and it tends to sometimes think that UX UI is tactical. UX UI strategy, on the other hand, is really focused on interactions and behaviors. It's very often data-driven rather than conceptually driven. It tends to lean towards best practices or the notion of best practices. And sometimes, when it's not feeling quite so collaborative, it thinks that brand is egocentric, that it's wrapped in on itself, and that it's not concerned about the user. However, if you get both of these sides to think harder about what they're doing, there's two realizations that suggest that there is a meeting point. The first is on the brand strategy side, any good brand planner or brand strategist would admit that ideas really only matter when they're experienced beyond the level of impression. It's not that first impression that matters the most. It's really the sum total of everything that a customer experiences, which is actually what we talked about in the last webinar. And on a UX/UI strategy, any good UX designer or digital marketing strategist would absolutely admit that best practices, by definition, are neither innovative or differentiating. Those are rules that everybody should follow, so there's certainly not enough. And so what it really comes down to is that these two disciplines are actually heading towards the same goal. And to flip it back to the model that we had before, it's really that overall customer experience, that's the shared goal that both brand and UX have. And if you want to see how do those two disciplines really kind of fit into this model, you know, another way to think about it is that brand planners traditionally tend to start and to focus most of their energy at the top of the pyramid. UX people tend to pick it up a little bit toward the middle and then bring through what would be considered tactics, the logistics of actually executing the strategy. And as you can see from what I've done here, there's a considerable amount of overlap. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How does that transition look? How do they collaborate? How do UX designers help pick up from the core brand and really bring those things through to strategy so that the goal is actually reached? So here's today's agenda. We're going to talk about how UX/UI strategy helps bring brand to life, but we're also going to talk about how brand concepts help inform, inspire, and I would argue actually improve UX strategy. We're going to start with the case study from PwC. We're going to actually pick it up from a little bit of what you saw in the last time, and then we're going to talk about 4 core concepts where brand and UX/UI meet. It's not comprehensive, but these are 4 key ideas that I think really show where these two overlap. And there's going to be one more thing, Steve Jobs style. There will actually be a prize. So at some point in this webinar, we're going to give away a Starbucks gift card. Here's the trick, though. You kind of have to wait to the end to actually win it. So stay tuned. We'll get to it relatively quickly, but this is your incentive to actually make it through the entire webinar, or at least leave it running on your desktop while you finish your email. We'll come back. We'll run a short contest, and hopefully we'll give away a Starbucks gift card to a lucky and attentive webinar participant. So starting off with the case study of PwC, the reason why I wanted to pick this up is because it's actually one of the key examples that Ryan Schulz used at the previous webinar. He used it as an example of a really good brand platform that was built to be digital. So we talked about the brand essence really based on this idea of intelligent growth, the promise and the tagline that they had built out. He talked through, we admired how the brand is really born to be digital, both in its visuals but also in its concepts, how well it works in a variety of concepts, in a variety of contexts, and how it can be translated to the world in really unexpected ways, like how nicely this brand works out in digital marketing. What I wanted to pick up today is actually take through an example of how that brand platform is translated into UX/UI strategy by taking a look at their annual CEO survey. Some of you have heard me talk through this before, so if in other situations, so stick with me for a little bit. We're going to point out some things that I think are particular to today's topic. So if you're not familiar with it, the PwC's annual Global CEO Survey is probably the most significant thought leadership campaign that they run in any given year, and it's been around for a while. They conduct interviews with over 1,300 CEOs. They're really careful about the selection. They actually manage the population for the survey based on the GDP of each country, so it's not weighted towards any one region inappropriately. It's been going for 18 years. It's deployed across a lot of digital channels, and each discrete interaction, as we're going to see across this entire campaign, is both informed by PwC's brand platform and actually helps to reinforce that brand platform. So let's dive into how they actually do this. One of the first interesting things they do is what they do in the run-up to launch. so not actually with the launch of it, but they'll actually have key PwC's leader here, their global chairman, start to tease pieces of information on social channels like Twitter or LinkedIn to help build interest for this survey. So here you have Dennis Nally actually releasing certain pieces of that information that helps warn people that it's coming, helps get them used to the timing of the survey, and build interest. Make sure that people look for it later. When they do launch it, they launch it at Davos, at the World Economic Forum. And the timing of that campaign, it's obvious to see the benefit. It's really, really prestigious event. It gets in front of the best possible audience. And if you couldn't go to Davos, or as I said here, if your spouse stole the private jet for the weekend and you just couldn't make it in, you can actually review that video and or webcast and or the live blog. So even though they're releasing this event, releasing it at a physical event in front of this audience, they're not making it exclusive. They'll let you watch the launch of this campaign live through their website. As it launches, they also offer what I thought was a really interesting piece, a quick 60-second overview to users who are new to the survey. They said it's been around for 18 years. So a lot of people know about the survey and they look for it every single year, but they want to make sure that they also address the people who don't necessarily know what it's about. And that actually shows some very careful handling about how they communicate to new relationships versus established relationships. They often use that as a good case study because that's actually a key pillar of their brand. You know, they know that they're well known. They know a lot of people know about the survey and don't need a lot of education, but they still want to make sure. If you do know about the survey, it's very easy to click past this or actually not end up at this at all. Just go to the report. They also spend a lot of time really connecting the participants and the recipients of the survey. So what's interesting is they're not just trying to create a connection between the people who read the survey and PwC and its leaders. They're creating connections between the people who read the survey and the CEOs who actually participated in the survey. So they've always done a lot of video. In this year, I noticed, in addition to sort of the overview videos where they explain the report, they had a lot of conversations with the CEOs who participated, and it really adds another layer of depth and interest to this content. You can get a little bit more human voice behind a lot of the data that ends up in the report. The report, of course, is actually natively digital. If you wanted to get a sort of PDF version, you kind of have to hunt around on that site. And there's a lot of reasons why they do that. So they launch the report in a custom section of their main website. They don't do it in a separate site. The reason for that, it's easy to, and natural for them to tie it together to other PwC themes, so the campaign doesn't sit quite so much on its own. When you click into the report, what you're actually viewing is this interactive tool rather than a big, long article or brochure. You get this interactive tool that kind of steps you through the data, and even more interestingly, you might not have an easy time seeing it on the WebEx, is there are opportunities to filter the data and drill down. So you can use these tools to sort of drill down to the piece of information, the cut of the data that's the most relevant to you, including a cut of the data that may not have been available in the PDF. The PDF is going to give you sort of the general answers. If you're interested in a particular industry or in a particular topic and you want to see how CEOs on those specific industries answer the question or in specific geographies answer the question, you really can do that through the sort of digital interactive tool. And then afterwards, they exploit what I like to call the echo effect. The campaign doesn't start at launch, so obviously they're doing tons of communication at launch, but thereafter, they're really good at getting individuals at PwC, the leaders and the partners, to actively distribute the survey or key insights throughout their online presence. Here we have a partner at PwC talking about the survey just in her own LinkedIn feed. So, just as a quick wrap of that case study, I really like it as an excellent example of branded strategy. And you know, as I was reviewing this, I really came together on 4 key elements that tie brand and strategy together in this campaign, and this is what we're going to talk about for the rest of the webinar. We're going to talk about context. In the PwC survey, you really saw that content is in the right places at the right time. The example of using social networks, the event tie-in. It's very obvious that they very carefully crafted the context for their content to make sure that it's absolutely on brand. The content strategy itself, you can see them deploying a lot of different content types, formats, and lengths that align to different themes. the web UI, that interactivity really proves their brand claims about being innovative, about really tying to intelligent growth, the use of an interactive tool rather than a sort of PDF brochure, as well as the tone and style. The brand voice permeates the entire campaign. The sort of straightforward, but actually relatively clear and approachable way that they talk about the insights really exists throughout the entire campaign. So those are the 4 key concepts we're going to talk about today. Let's start with context. Context is obviously a multifaceted word, sometimes a general word. But for today, I think it's important just to know that it's ultimately about the art of placing your content in the right place at the right time. And we like to think of it as content merchandising. Now, that's a concept I blatantly stole from my colleague, Jen Bullitt, but because she's home taking care of her new son, hi, Max, she's not here to defend her own ideas. So sorry, Jen, I'm taking it and running with it. But these are some of the elements that we think of as context. It could be the channel. It could be the physical place, right? It could be the time and the timing of that communication, the arrangement of that content, particularly in respect to other content. But it could also come down to people. What other kinds of people are in that channel, or what kinds of people are actually interacting with that content. All of this can be an aspect of context. Creating the right context is really important. There's the fundamental rule for marketing in general, but also for UX UI, when you're thinking about where to place your content, is to go where your users are, to go where the audience is. That is, one of the fundamental rules of marketing overall. But it's not enough to just be where your audience is. Consider what I like to call the Facebook maturity model, especially for mature professionals. So if you are like me and you're a digital migrant, not a digital native, and if you've gone onto Facebook, I think your experience might have looked a little bit like this. You might have actually started joining just to figure out what your kids are doing. At some point, your mom finds you, and you have a little cringe of regret for joining in the first place. You start getting a lot of invitation from people you don't know, or at least you don't remember. You start to like it, right? You find that your friends are actually kind of interesting. You start to interact. You get a lot of cute cat pictures. That's pretty fun. That's really cool. Then you start being guilted. People tell you like this, or this little child will die, or some other bad thing will happen. So you start going through pangs of guilt. Eventually, you start thinking your friends are boring, right? The funny thing that I think about when Facebook comes up as a marketing tool is that on the one hand, from a pure data point of view, a lot of people are on it, and in fact, even for people all the way up through age 60 or beyond, there's a ton of people on Facebook. The audience is there, but it's not enough. It doesn't matter how much of your audience is on Facebook. They probably don't want to actually see a lot of marketing content for professional services. It's still not the right context. So here I have, a marketer in a fake Facebook post putting out the Q1 report, cutest Q1 report ever. You won't believe the fuzzies. I'm going to totally get one. Sounds ridiculous, of course. If you're like me and your primary commenters on your Facebook feed are your parents, then the comment exchange might look a little bit like what's happening on this slide. The point here is that a digital context, a good one, is not going to align just the habits of your users. It's not going to be just where they are, but also the principles and qualities of your brand. So who does it right? Ernst & Young, I actually think, does a really good job. Like a lot of consulting firms, they put content across many different channels, and particularly on their own channels, the ones that they own and control, they do a really good job of applying some consistent branding. So you've got a peek here into their LinkedIn page and their Twitter feed. I think they do a really good job of targeting those to the key audiences and making sure that they're in front of the very professional audience that they want. What I think is also, even more a little more interesting, is how they place content in channels or platforms they don't own. So here, Ernst & Young is engaged in a native advertising partnership with Forbes. And if you're not familiar with native advertising, it's essentially like paid content placement, but without the sort of visual and emotional baggage that a lot of ads are built with. So it's legitimate thought leadership. It does actually go through sort of a Forbes editorial process, It's not selling hard. In fact, it's really not selling anything in particular. But because of this partnership, Ernst & Young, EY, can get their thought leadership in front of the Forbes audience. And it provides EY with the right audience, the right place, the right time, and the right company, meaning the right associations with the other kinds of content and the other people that are on Forbes. The next main pillar of the overlap between brand and UX UI strategy is content strategy. It's another tricky term. It's probably the least well-defined term in UX strategy today. I think it can mean anything or everything. But for the sake of today, we're going to talk about these specific aspects. So content strategy could be topic of the content, could be the length, could be the format, the source, where it's coming from, and as well as the timing. So any of these aspects in content strategy can affect how that content is inspired by, but also furthers your brand. So really the connection with brand with content strategy has to comes down to the kind of association it makes. So I think anybody who works in content strategy and content marketing today knows that the right kind of content can elicit an experience that is either engaging, inspiring, informing, challenging, surprising, even amusing. All of these are experience-based brand associations that talk about what the person feels as they consume your content, and so it can become a really important connection to brand. Where I've seen this a lot recently is actually what I like to call the visual revolution in content strategy. So a lot of people are realizing that content is not just copy, it's not just text. We talk a lot about visual content. Two of the biggest trends right now, information graphics. You can see them everywhere. Here's an example from the New York Times. It's actually kind of a depressing slide about the presence of women within technology roles and how it's really dropped off since the year 2000. But the point, and it's the point of a lot of information graphics, is to create that sort of informative feeling in a really brief and concise, at-a-glance sort of a way. So information graphics are working not just because they're interesting, but because they can keep you informed and make you feel informed in a relatively brief and concise manner. The TED Talks revolution, if you guys have gone, I think, to any professional content conference in the last 2 or 3 years, you've known that these have taken off, the 15-minute style presentation. I think the magic about TED Talks, to a certain extent, is a little bit about shortening the length. I think people like the fact that they can consume more ideas in a shorter period of time. But I think the essence is actually the fact that those really good TED Talks, the videos that we'll actually watch on the web or go after, is the fact that they're really focused in on the idea of inspiring. They're not even so much about information. They're not about education. They're really about giving you a core idea that gets you thinking about other things. And that's really the magic of that content. So who I think actually does it well, Strategy and, formerly Booz & Company, offers a lot of different formats. What I think is interesting, and here you actually just have their newsletter sign up from their website. Not usually a very interesting widget to see on a web page. It's usually very functional. What I thought was interesting about the way they do this is the way that they broke up their newsletters. So unlike a lot of competitors, people in this space, it's not by industry or by practice area that they're breaking up their newsletters. The way that you subscribe is based on really the kinds of content, but also what function or value you're seeking from that content. So they have e-news, at a glance, thought leaders, recent research, and business literature. And the way that I interpret these things is that the first two, e-news and at a glance, that's really about keeping me informed. The thought leaders is really about inspiring me, and the research and literature is really about the research that helps me improve. So it's not even really about topic, it's not about industry, it's not about the stuff that's inside that newsletter. The division that they offer you, the subscription they offer you, is really based on, well, what value? Why do you actually want this content? Do you want to stay informed? Are you looking for new ideas? Or do you need research that actually helps you on your job? That's the decision you have to make. Another example of somebody who I think does it really well is Goldman Sachs. And they have an infographic based on social impact bonds, which is something that they invented. So I'm actually going to zoom in so you can get a little bit closer view of it. It's an infographic that runs a little bit long, so we'll just kind of zoom down a little bit so you can see, at least schematically, how this works. What I really like about this example is that it combines several different kinds of content, or content that would often be separated. So it's an information graphic. It helps keep you informed. It also educates you about what a social impact bond is. It's a corporate social responsibility piece, so it's really talking about their impact to the world overall. But it's also very much a kind of experience or credentialing piece, because this is actually at the really heart of what Goldman Sachs does as a business. If you think about what a social impact bond is, or if you go and read this, you understand that it's a financial instrument that they invented that helps get funding for social endeavors from capital markets. So even though it is about social impact, it's very much tied to the reason that they exist as a business. This is what they're good at, creating financial instruments to achieve goals of one form or another. Now, for the most part, it's very often to help a company generate more profit. Here, they're using it for a nonprofit, but it's still the same core skill. And it's just really impressive the way that they have tuned this content strategy to bring those three aims together and really nail several different themes that are, in most situations, kind of parceled out to different kinds of communications and aimed at different people. Web UI is the next area that we're going to talk about. Now, Web UI, UX, this is the one that can often seem least influenced by brand. It's really, as a discipline, it spends a lot of time thinking about best practices. And there are, believe me, a ton of them. All the UX strategists here spend a lot of time thinking, learning about, and using rules like these. You have the 5 cluster 2 item rule. That's about how many pieces of information you can arrange in a collection before it starts to look too big or too heavy. Things like test and learn, don't feel white space, establishing a hierarchy, paying attention to consistency. All of these are actually pretty good rules. But, and here's the kicker, we started off with this today, by definition they won't get you to new, innovative, or different, simply because these are rules. These are well recognized. Everybody knows these rules, and everybody tries to follow them. So you could follow all of these rules and still not end up with anything that feels different or new or actually very special. So let's talk about how thinking about UI, UX is improved when it's actually really informed by brand. So the first example I have comes again from EY, but it's a really different sort of content arrangement and campaign. They have a site called 5 Minutes. And I've included the URL here because I think it's interesting and you might want to go take a look at it. But what it exists essentially is a curated selection of content from across EY altogether. But what they've done from it in repositioning it here, the reason this tool exists is they've put it together in these 5-minute chunks, right? Not only are they 5-minute chunks of content, but they group them together as like, here's the content you can scan for about 5 minutes. In other words, if you only got about 5 minutes to give me, then I can get you through the content that I think is the most useful for you. The UI overall is maximized for this task. So it's maximized for copy and visual scanning. So you can read through the headlines really quickly, which are actually very short, much shorter than they are in other parts of EY.com. And they're accompanied with visuals that really help you understand what is that piece about. The point, of course, is to get EY integrated into your regular information consumption. They're pushing a brand point here that EY is not just about that one big engagement or the incredibly difficult problem. It's not the merger you're facing or the factory that you're opening up. It's really a source that is in your day-to-day. EY wants to be in your day-to-day habits. Another example of somebody who does it really well, actually, is Debevoise and Plimpton. And in full disclosure, this is a site that One North helped them to design. So you see a shot here of their homepage, and I'm again going to zoom in just so you can see it a little bit better. So this is their homepage. Now, a UX UI person, if they looked at this homepage, one of the first things they would notice is just the huge amount of content that's on it. From a pure UX perspective, there's probably a little too much. Now, there's definitely a visual hierarchy going on. There are a lot of best practices that this does follow, but there's one that seems to be getting violated. There is, however, a specific brand reason why this is happening, because even though there's a lot of information on here, there's a lot of headline stories on here, it's informed by key specific brand goals. So one of the things that Debevoise, when they redesigned their homepage and they actually launched with a new brand, is that they really wanted to show that they were busy. They wanted to articulate activity. They're a very well-known Wall Street firm, but they wanted to be known as something more than a white shoe, kind of conservative, kind of sleepy firm. They wanted to show that they're actually active across a lot of different practices that surprise people. They wanted to show people something that was unexpected, which is another key brand goal that they had. And then finally, they really wanted to show that they're really connected, that they really have these deep relationships with businesses that are actually really innovative, that are not just on Wall Street, and they wanted to show that as well. So the point of this homepage, as you see, as it came out here, is not that everybody read every single story. I think it's acknowledged that that's somewhat of an impractical goal, right? They're not expecting everybody to click on everything. The point is that you come here, you look at this, and you get an impression that Debevoise is actually very active, that it's active across different practices and industries that might actually surprise you, and that it has these relationships to these really vibrant companies and organizations. So in the end, what you're seeing here is actually brand informing and actually pushing a UX designer to really kind of break or go against what is considered in most situations a best practice, but to do so in a thoughtful and very strategic way. Finally, tone and style. I told you there would be prizes, so here's where we're going to actually do it. Now it's time to actually run a quick contest based on tone and style. So here's the contest. This is really for all you ex-English majors, thanks to Garrison Keillor, the Professional Organization of English Majors. If you were an English major or in a similar humanities field, hopefully you'll do well at this one. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to show you 3 excerpts from books that you really ought to have read in high school, even if you didn't, so they'll be well-known books. We're going to reveal the author of 2 of them, and then we want you to guess the author of the 3rd. Submit your guess along with a question about this webinar in the webinar chat function. So Kayla described the chat function at the beginning of the webinar. You can see it in WebEx. We want to go ahead and have you use that chat function to submit your guess as well as a question. The first correct guess of the author of the 3rd piece with a question, you've got to have a question or your guess doesn't count, wins a $25 Starbucks gift card, and we'll give you an extra $10 if you can also guess the book correctly. All right, let's start with our first example. Do you know the author of this one? This is a famous opening to a novel. What a lark, what a plunge, for so it had always seemed to her when, with a little squeak of the hinges, which she could hear now, she had burst open the French windows and plunged at Burton into the open air. I'm interested to know, how many of you knew that this was the opening to Virginia Woolf's masterpiece, from probably her most famous novel, Mrs. Dalloway. What's interesting here is that I think it's really the style that you're picking up from here. It's really the tone, her way of having long sentences that are actually broken up into shorter, really easy to understand phrases, but the way that she just creates a feeling, how a sentence seems to get away from her a little bit on purpose. Let's flip it. Last one was a famous opening to a novel. I'll try to make this one a little bit easier and warn you this is a famous ending to a novel. Oh, Jake, Brett said, we could have had such a damn good time together. Ahead was a mounted policeman in khaki directing traffic. He raised his baton. The car slowed, suddenly pressing Brett against me. Yes, I said. Isn't it pretty to think so? This is, of course, the very famous ending. Oops, I flipped back. The very famous ending to The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. Here you can see just how different the style of writing is. Instead of those connected sentences that are really evoking feelings and emotions, Ernest Hemingway is sticking to very short, declarative sentences. He's letting you pick up the feeling and emotion behind it. His characters actually very often don't talk about the emotions that they're experiencing. His genius as a writer is, of course, that you understand them anyway. That sort of very sad but sweet futility in that last line is very often what everybody admires about the way that Ernest Hemingway writes. Now for the last one, and this is the one that you have to guess. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. We want you to guess the author, and we're going to make it multiple choice. Your 4 choices are Charles Dickens, Henry James, Jane Austen, or Mark Twain. All right, everybody? So please take your guess. Combine it with a question about the webinar. Don't forget that you actually have to ask a question about the webinar in addition to submitting your guess. And the first correct answer with the question gets a Starbucks gift card. Okay. Now, why did we do that whole exercise other than give you an opportunity to get some more caffeine? We really wanted to talk about tone and style and why it's important. The point of this exercise is that in many instances it is possible for you to understand who that author is with a really minimum of detail, right? You can often pick up from really good authors. You can have a sense of where that text is coming from just from the tone and style. Now, for us in this age, tone and style applies to both copy. It also applies to imagery. And I want to talk about why UX/UI strategy adds another level to this concern. So think about this scenario for a little bit. You publish something out on your website, right? You publish a really great report or content campaign out on your website. Maybe you also put it out on your blog or some other social feed, right? So you'll start promoting that across several different channels. Maybe it gets reshared by somebody. This is actually what you want. Then it gets mentioned by somebody else, and then finally that mention gets reshared. So your content starts to expand and go what I like to call free range. It gets farther and farther away from the actual source or from the first publishing platform. As I said, this is very often the goal as a digital marketer. This is what you want. However, the more your content is shared and distributed, the less you can actually rely on visual systems like logo, color, and type, what we often typically use as shorthand for brand, to create those brand associations. So let me show you actually what happens on the example we looked at before. So we saw PwC launch content on its own website. It's very well branded, visually, tone, the imagery is very much tied to them. But as that content starts to expand out through different channels, even the YouTube channels we see here, brand is pretty much reduced to a small little logo right here. The visual aspect of that brand is down here. You could argue that they've been able to get the visual aspect into the video, so that's actually okay. It's in the content itself. But as you start to see that content go even further, out onto LinkedIn, out onto Forbes, into other platforms altogether, as the CEO survey, which has a huge impact, gets written about and mentioned and shared and tweeted, the visual architecture of brand, that logo and that color, can't be relied on anymore to make that connection. So this is really why we want to talk about tone or style, or about how you have to actually get brand into the content itself, because it can be very easily lost. In fact, it's more easily lost the more successful you are as a content marketer. So who does it well? Actually, I'm going to talk about an example that might be a little bit from left field, but this is a Norwegian law firm. It's a Norwegian boutique law firm. It's in dual language. I'm going to focus in on English because I don't speak Norwegian, but it's actually very impressive how established a tone and style this website has, how consistent they are, but also how open it is. So their tone and style, and we'll show you a few examples. It's very clear. It's very concise. It's interrogative. It's curious about you. And finally, in fact, one of the most important things, it's excited to work. It's excited to work with you. It's excited to work for you. So let's take a look at just a few closer examples. Their service description, a very consistent structure that aligns to that brand tone. The interrogative style, they really structure almost everything around questions or exclamations, show that they understand the client's perspective. So they start off with, how can we assist you? But then their second section of content here is design adds value to the business. Right now, what are they doing as a law firm? Are they designing? No, they are protecting design assets through intellectual property law. But just starting with this exclamation, starting with this value that they know their clients had, that design has value and that it adds value to the business, shows how much they understand the client's perspective. It even comes up in their news items, and this is one of the most impressive pieces, even though it's relatively short. We don't have time to read through everything, but I'll start with just the way that this piece is written. So it starts with design development as a strategic part of the business pays. So even though that this is really actually kind of a case study or a results piece, it starts with this statement that is really about the core theme that makes the win important, not the win itself. And in fact, this law firm's involvement doesn't really come into the end. So the first thing they talk about is the design development. What did this company do? What did they design? Turns out to be new packaging for milk, right? They start talking about the importance, the impact that that new packaging had on their business, then about the need to protect it, and then about the fact that Akako helped them protect the intellectual property in that new packaging. So let's head towards a wrap-up. I think it's actually pretty straightforward. Really, UX, UI doesn't change a lot about brand itself, but as we said, it's really focusing in on the same goal that brand ultimately is. It really wants an overall customer experience that is compelling and brand-aligned. And if one way to think about it is that brand is focusing in on the top of the pyramid, then UX, UI is really focused on the middle towards the end. And as we said, I think 4 really great areas to focus in on for brand and UXI are context, content strategy, web UI, tone and style. Again, there are probably others, but those are 4 great places to start. So next time on One North webinars, there's a 3rd installment in this entire series, as Ryan Scholes mentioned. We're going to actually hear from Nate Dennen, the Managing Director of Creative Services. He's going to actually talk about those brand expression systems, particularly with regards to digital. And we'll have a discussion, all 3 of us will come back to the end. That's going to happen a little bit later in May, so take a look for that webinar as well. And I think we'll start opening with Q&A and discussion.
Yeah, we're just going to dive right in here. Can you give us some best practices for how law firms can do what you've spoken about today?
Sure. I mean, I think the first best practice is to actually have your brand platform and those themes articulated in a way actually that Ryan talked about last time. One of the few things that can be a struggle for UX, UI designers when they're trying to get a hold of a brand is to be handed things and you ask about a brand platform, and what you get is a logo and a color and maybe some typefaces. I think that can be very helpful for visual design. It's not as helpful for UX, UI design. We're really much more interested in themes or things like tone and style. Another thing to do, I think, is to actually just fully understand all the context that you are in, like understand what you are doing in your with your content right now. So even a relatively brief audit of what's going on and what you're doing and what are you placing where is a very useful exercise to get started.
Great. Our next question is, how do we bring all of the elements, branding, web, social, thought leadership, content, together in a cohesive way?
So again, I think that the thing that's going to tie them all together is that brand theme, are those brand themes. So even if we flip back here, it really is that essence and purpose. That's going to be your glue, right? You're going to understand if everything actually starts coming together by really having a well-defined reference point for the essence of purpose, really understanding what the voice and the persona for your brand is. Having that reference point is what's going to enable you to know whether you're out of alignment in any one way or another. So again, I think, and it doesn't mean that you have to rebrand. Maybe it's just finding an articulation for where your brand is right now. But understanding what that is going to be the best, I think, guidepost for you going forward.
This might be a similar question, but you talked about the connectivity between content and brand. How would you start designing a content strategy based on brand association?
That is an excellent question. I think to a certain extent there is a little bit of research that you would want to do, right? I think you can use things like quantitative research to understand where people are. That's still important. You don't want to be in a context where your audience doesn't exist. But I think you need to pair it with a certain amount of qualitative research, right? So you need to actually talk to people and have interviews and understand how and why are they using Facebook. You can answer a question easily about whether or not somebody uses a Facebook account. But what you really need to get is, what are they really doing that for? Even something like LinkedIn, which a lot of people have agreed is a great context for most professional services firms, there are some differences amongst users about how and why people use it. Some people use it to look for a lot of updates, probably more than a lot of people think. Others use it just purely to connect with people. And that can suggest two different ways of using it. So if you're dealing with a user population, for example, that doesn't go to LinkedIn to look for news, they're not really reviewing their feed, they're just looking for people, then the way that you want to use it for content strategy is to actually have people post stuff, right? So you're going to want to push hard to get your actual thought leaders, your experts, and your leaders to push that content rather than having your brand push that content, because it's going to be a lot more effective. So I think, to go back to the question at the beginning, is to really start with that qualitative and quantitative research. And I've said this before, I think, in other webinars or other contexts. You very often don't have to do as much as a lot of people fear. I think a lot of people, especially when they're thinking about consumer-based marketing or B2C marketing, fear that when somebody says research, it means you have to kind of talk to 1,000 people. It very rarely requires that much effort. A lot of really great research projects can be done in a matter of weeks, not months.
I'm just going to add to that. This is Ryan again. That I think it's important to make sure. I totally agree with everything Kalev just said. I think it's important to make sure that research is meaningful too, right? So the more meaningful it is, the more likely you're going to find out what you really need to know, not just maybe what you want to hear. And you'll end up with insights that can actually drive a platform. And so by meaningful, I mean talking to people that are actually participants in the brand, stakeholders at all levels, not necessarily just the highest paid professional in the room, actual clients, or even better yet, prospects, people that aren't clients yet, so you can figure out exactly what is their opinion of the firm or the organization.
Great. Our last question is that we're going to have time to get to is new relationships versus established relationships. How should we handle the targeting of these different groups?
Oh, that's an excellent question. That could be like a whole webinar in and of itself. It's not a bad suggestion for the next webinar because I think that there are some differences. I think the differences come out in modes of conversation or aspects of the brand. I don't think it comes out in the brand itself. I think the brand is actually very consistent. At least you want it to be consistent. But I do think that there are very often some key tactical/strategic differences in terms of how you talk to those people and the kinds of information that you want to give them. It starts off with, the very simple realization that new audiences need a little bit more education and positioning about who you are and what it is that you're doing. You're often pushing a lot of awareness issues with them. That doesn't mean you can't have content that works for both audiences. Thought leadership is an excellent example of something that works for both audiences at the same time, right? Thought leadership is very useful to the people that you know. But particularly within digital, it's great at getting the attention of the people you don't know, even if it's just from a Google search about a particular topic. For the people that you do know, I think that the challenge there, or what you really want to be thinking on, is how to provide value beyond the relationship that they already have. They have a relationship with you. You're doing work. They're, to a certain extent, literally they've already bought in, right? But you want to be showing that that relationship is still delivering them continuous value. So it can affect a lot of different tactics. I don't really have the space to go into the details, but that's actually not a bad suggestion for another topic. So are we ready to go to the winner of the prize? Are you guys ready? It's prize time again. Let's talk about the answer first. So we showed you this passage. It is truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. We asked you who was the author. And the answer is Jane Austen. This is the opening to her famous Pride and Prejudice novel. It's actually literally the first opening line. So if you successfully got that, congratulations. And in fact, I think Kayla's going to be ready to reveal the winner of this prize.
Yes, our winner is Stephanie Marone.
Yay, Stephanie. You will be able to get more coffee. Hopefully they will spell your name correctly. All right, so Stephanie will follow up with you and get you your Starbucks gift card. Thanks, everybody. I'm sure there were more questions, but we'll try to answer those offline. Thanks so much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.